The great palace of the empire stood at the center of a world made of black glass and fire. It was the largest building in 12 star systems, and inside it lived the most powerful creature in the known galaxy. Emperor the Eternal had ruled his empire for 900 years. He had conquered planets, ended wars, and built civilizations from nothing. But on this particular morning, he sat on his obsidian throne with his head in his clawed hands, looking more defeated than he had ever looked in his entire long life. The reason for his despair was simple. It was not an enemy army. It was not a rebellion. It was not even a threat from the mysterious beings that lived beyond the edge of known space. No, the thing that had broken the great emperor was something much smaller and much closer to home. His children. 3 baby dragons had hatched from the sacred ember pools 6 weeks ago. They were the first royal children born in 300 years, and they were supposed to be a blessing. The entire empire had celebrated their arrival. Fireworks had lit up the skies of 1,000 worlds. Songs had been written in their honor. The emperor himself had wept with joy when he first saw them emerge from their eggs, small and wet and perfect. But that joy had not lasted long. The bobbies were named Pyrex, and Pyrex was the largest, with scales the color of blood and eyes that glowed like burning coals, was smaller and more delicate, her scales shifting between orange and gold like flames dancing in a fireplace, and was the runt of the group, covered in scales of soft gray, always hiding behind his bigger siblings. They were beautiful, they were precious, and they were absolutely impossible to care for. The first nurse had been a member of a species famous throughout the galaxy for their patience and gentle nature, had raised difficult children for thousands of years. They had techniques that had been refined over countless generations. The nurse had arrived at the palace full of confidence, certain that she could handle anything. She lasted 3 days. On the first day, Pyrex had set fire to her robes when she tried to pick him up. On the second day, had screamed at a frequency so high that it shattered every piece of glass in the nursery. On the third day, Little had bitten her hand hard enough to draw blood, and they had packed her bags and left without even saying goodbye. The second nurse was a creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a cloud, had evolved on a dangerous world where caring for young was a matter of life and death. They were supposed to be impossible to frighten, impossible to hurt, and impossible to drive away. The nurse had promised the emperor that she would stay no matter what. She lasted 1 week. The bobbies had discovered that if all 3 of them screamed at the same time, they could create a sound that caused the physical pain. They had done this every single night, for hours at a time, until the nurse had collapsed from exhaustion and begged to be released from her contract. After that came the twins, who had raised the children of warlords. They lasted 4 days. Then came the ancient monk from the Order of Pale Silence, who had taken a vow to never speak or complain about anything for the rest of his life. He broke that vow after just 2 days with the dragon bobbies, using words that shocked even the palace guards. Nurse after nurse arrived at the palace. Nurse after nurse fled in terror, in pain, or in tears. Some of them did not even make it through a single day. The record was held by a brave volunteer from the planet who had walked into the nursery, taken one look at the 3 hatchlings, and walked right back out again without saying a word. The emperor had tried everything. He had offered more money. He had offered titles and land and honors. He had threatened and begged and pleaded. Nothing worked. No one in the entire empire wanted the job of caring for his children. And the worst part was that the emperor could not do it himself. It was not that he did not love his children. He loved them more than anything in the universe. But dragon bobbies needed constant care and attention, and the emperor had an empire to run. He had meetings and councils and decisions that could not wait. He had wars to prevent and treaties to sign, and 1,000 other responsibilities that demanded his time. More than that, there was a painful truth that did not like to admit. His children were afraid of him. Whenever he entered the nursery, they would hide in the corners and hiss at him like he was a stranger. They did not know him. They did not trust him. And with their mother dead, killed by the difficult birth that had brought them into the world, they had no one to teach them that their father was not a threat. On this particular morning, the emperor watched as yet another nurse ran screaming from the nursery, her clothes on fire and her dignity in ruins. He sighed heavily and turned to his chief advisor, a tall creature named Grand Chancellor who had served the royal family for 500 years. "Tell me there is someone else," said. "Tell me there is one more species we have not tried." Shifted uncomfortably on his many legs, his multiple eyes blinked in a pattern that meant he was nervous. "Your Magnificence, we have contacted every qualified caregiver species in the Empire. We have even reached out to species beyond our borders. No one will accept the position." "Then find someone unqualified," the Emperor growled. Smoke curled from his nostrils as his frustration grew. "Find someone desperate. Find someone who does not know enough to be afraid." Hesitated for a long moment. Then he spoke carefully, as if testing dangerous ground. "There is one possibility we have not considered: the humans." Humans? Frowned. He had heard of humans, of course. They were a young species from a small planet on the edge of the galaxy. They had only recently discovered space travel and joined the galactic community. They were soft, weak, and short-lived. Most of them did not even survive 100 years. "They are not qualified for anything," said. "What could a human possibly do that Aurora could not?" "I do not know, Your Magnificence," admitted. "But humans have a strange reputation. They are known for being stubborn beyond all reason. They do not give up, even when they should. And they have a saying on their world that I find interesting." "What saying?" Translator clicked as it processed the human words. "They say that there is no such thing as a bad child, only a child who has not been understood." The Emperor was silent for a long time. He looked at the nursery door, still smoking from the latest disaster. He listened to the sounds of his children crying inside, those terrible screams that drove everyone away. "Bring me a human," he finally said. "We have nothing left to lose." Lucy Grant had been a nurse for 12 years before the aliens came to Earth. She had worked in the children's ward of a busy hospital in Chicago, where the days were long and the nights were longer. She had seen everything. She had held crying bobbies at 3 in the morning. She had calmed toddlers who were terrified of needles. She had dealt with teenagers who thought they were too tough to follow doctors' orders. She had cleaned up every kind of mess a human body could produce. She had been vomited on, sneezed on, coughed on, and once memorably peed on by a 6-year-old who thought it was hilarious. She had been screamed at by frightened children and yelled at by even more frightened parents. Through it all, she had kept her calm and done her job. Then the aliens had arrived, and everything changed. The first contact had been peaceful, which surprised everyone. The galaxy, it turned out, was full of life. Thousands of species had been traveling between the stars for millions of years, and they welcomed humanity into their community with open arms. Suddenly, there were new worlds to explore, new technologies to learn, and new opportunities for anyone brave enough to take them. Lucy had always wanted to see the stars. When the recruitment officer had appeared at the orbital station above Earth, Lucy had been between jobs and looking for something new. The officer was a nervous-looking creature with too many arms and not enough confidence. He had explained that the Empire was looking for a caregiver for some very special children. "What kind of special?" Lucy had asked. "Royal children," the officer had said, "the Emperor's own offspring." That sounded impressive. Lucy had asked more questions. What species were they? "Dragons," the officer said. "How old were they?" "Just a few weeks, newly hatched." What was the pay? More money than Lucy had ever seen in her life. "What's the catch?" she had finally asked. The officer had fidgeted with his many hands. "The children are spirited," he had said. "They have had some difficulty adjusting to their caregivers." Lucy had not pushed for more details. That was her first mistake. The journey to the took 3 weeks. Lucy spent most of that time learning about her new employers. They were an ancient species, one of the oldest in the galaxy. They were dragon-like creatures, covered in scales, capable of breathing fire and very long-lived. Their emperor, the Eternal, had ruled for 900 years and was considered one of the most powerful beings in existence. His children were the first royal hatchlings in 3 centuries. Their birth had been cause for celebration across 12-star systems. Their mother, the Empress, had died bringing them into the world. And now, Lucy learned with growing concern, they had driven away every single caregiver who had tried to help them. How many caregivers? Lucy asked the officer who was escorting her to the palace. 37, the officer admitted. In 6 weeks. Some of them did not last very long. Lucy took a deep breath. She was beginning to understand what spirited really meant. The palace was enormous. Lucy had never seen anything so big in her life. It rose from the black glass surface of the planet like a mountain made of obsidian and gold. Thousands of windows glowed with firelight. Hundreds of towers reached toward the orange sky. The whole thing looked like something from a dream, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The nursery was on the top floor of the central tower. Lucy walked through hallways lined with guards who looked at her with expressions she could not read. Some of them seemed curious. Most of them seemed sorry for her. When she reached the nursery door, she could hear sounds coming from inside. Hissing, growling, the crash of something breaking, and underneath it all, a high-pitched crying that made her heart hurt. "Are you ready?" the officer asked. "No," Lucy said honestly, "but let's do it anyway." The door opened, and Lucy got her first look at the Emperor's children. The room was a disaster. The walls were black with scorch marks. The floor was covered with the melted remains of what might have been toys. In the far corner, 3 small dragon creatures were huddled together, their eyes fixed on the door. A terrified servant was standing near them, holding a tray of food that he clearly wanted to put down and run away from. The bobbies were smaller than Lucy had expected. Each one was about the size of a large dog, though their long tails and wings made them seem bigger. Pyrex, the red one, was snarling with tiny fangs bared. The orange and gold one was making a sound like a tea kettle about to explode. And the little gray one was pressed against the wall behind his siblings, shaking with fear. "Leave us," Lucy said to the servant. The servant stared at her. "But miss, they need to eat. They have not eaten in 2 days." "I said leave us." The servant did not need to be told again. He dropped the tray and fled. The door closed behind him, and Lucy was alone with the dragons. For a long moment, no one moved. The bobbies stared at Lucy with their glowing eyes. Lucy stared back at them with her ordinary human ones. "Well," she said quietly, "you 3 have been giving everyone a lot of trouble, haven't you?" Pyrex opened his mouth and shot a stream of fire directly at her face. Lucy felt the heat wash over her, close enough to singe her eyebrows. She did not move. She did not flinch. She did not scream. After 12 years in the children's ward, she had learned that the worst thing you could do was show fear. "That's very impressive," she said calmly. "But I've had worse. A kid once threw up directly into my open mouth. You're going to have to try harder than fire." The bobbies exchanged confused looks. This was not the reaction they were used to. Every other caregiver had screamed and run away at the first sign of flames. This strange, soft creature was just standing there, talking to them like nothing had happened. Lucy sat down on the floor, making herself small and unthreatening. She did not try to approach them. She did not try to touch them. She just sat there, looking at them with tired but kind eyes. "Here's what I think," she said in a gentle voice. "I think you're not mean. I think you're scared. And I think everyone who came before me was so afraid of you that they made you more afraid of them." Made a small sound, almost like a whimper. His siblings pressed closer to him protectively. I'm not going to run away, Lucy continued. I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to try to force you to do anything. I'm just going to sit here until you decide what you want to do. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. Take your time, she said. I'm not going anywhere. Lucy stayed in the nursery for 7 hours that first day. She did not try to feed the bobbies. She did not try to clean up the mess. She just sat there, quiet and calm, watching them without making any sudden moves. At first, the dragons stayed in their corner, hissing whenever she shifted her position. But as the hours passed, something strange began to happen. The hissing became less frequent. The glowing eyes became less angry. And eventually, Little crept forward just a few inches, his gray nose twitching with curiosity. Lucy pretended not to notice. She hummed a soft tune under her breath, an old song her grandmother used to sing. The bobbies tilted their heads at the sound, their ear fins perking up like dogs hearing a whistle. Interesting, Lucy thought. They react to sounds. By the end of the first week, Lucy had learned many things about baby dragons. She learned them not from books or from the palace advisors, but from careful observation. She watched the bobbies constantly, noting what made them upset and what seemed to calm them down. She paid attention to the small details that everyone else had missed. The first thing she learned was that the nursery was all wrong. It was too bright, too cold, and too quiet. Dragon bobbies were supposed to be born in volcanic caves, surrounded by warmth and the constant rumble of the earth. This sterile white room with its harsh lights was completely foreign to them. The second thing she learned was that the bobbies could sense emotions. Every caregiver before Lucy had been terrified, and the dragons had absorbed that fear like sponges. They had learned that the creatures who came to take care of them were afraid, and that had made the bobbies afraid too. Fear creates fear, Lucy realized. They were not attacking because they were mean. They were attacking because they were defending themselves against what they thought was a threat. The third thing she learned was that the bobbies missed their mother. They had spent weeks inside their eggs, listening to her heartbeat and feeling her warmth. When they hatched, she was gone. No one had tried to fill that empty space. Lucy started making changes. She asked the palace servants to remove the bright lights and replace them with heat lamps that glowed orange and red like lava. She requested rocks from the emperor's ancestral world and scattered them around the room to give the bobbies familiar smells. She covered the floor with soft sand instead of hard tile. The advisors thought she was crazy. These are royal children, Chancellor told her. They deserve the finest things in the empire, not rocks and dirt. What they deserve, Lucy replied, is to feel safe, and right now they don't feel safe at all. Grumbled but allowed her to continue. The emperor had given orders that the human nurse was to be given whatever she asked for, no matter how strange it seemed. The changes helped, but they were not enough. The bobbies were still frightened. They still hissed at Lucy when she came too close. They still refused to eat unless she was on the other side of the room. Lucy knew she was missing something. There was a piece of the puzzle that she had not found yet. The answer came to her late one night, as she was sitting in the transformed nursery watching the bobbies sleep. They were curled up together in a pile, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath. Occasionally, one of them would make a soft sound, almost like a purr. Lucy had been humming again that same old song from her grandmother, and as she hummed, she noticed something strange. The bobbies seemed to relax. Their breathing became deeper, their tense muscles loosened. She hummed a different song, a faster one with a higher pitch. The bobbies stirred uncomfortably. Pyrex growled in his sleep. She went back to the first song, low and slow and rumbling. The bobbies settled down again. That's when Lucy understood. Dragons communicated through vibration. They could feel sounds as much as they could hear them. Every other caregiver had been speaking to them in high, sharp voices full of fear. To the bobbies, it must have felt like being yelled at constantly. But Lucy's low humming was different. It was soothing. It was warm. It reminded them of their mother. The next morning, Lucy asked about dragon mothers. How did the Empress communicate with her children before they hatched? Looked surprised by the question. She would wrap herself around the eggs and sing to them. It is an ancient tradition. The mother's song teaches the children that they are safe. What does the song sound like? Thought for a moment, then made a low, rumbling sound deep in his throat. It was almost below the range of human hearing, more felt than heard. Lucy smiled. She finally knew what to do. That afternoon, she sat in the middle of the nursery and began to hum. But this time, she did not hum her grandmother's song. Instead, she tried to match the sound that it made. It was difficult. Human throats were not built for such low sounds. But Lucy had spent years learning how to calm frightened children, and she had developed a special low voice that seemed to work on even the most upset bobbies. She hummed low and slow, letting the sound vibrate through her chest. She closed her eyes and imagined warmth, safety, love. She thought about what it would feel like to be small and scared and alone, and how much she would want someone to tell her that everything was going to be okay. The bobbies stopped what they were doing. All three of them turned to look at her, their eyes wide with surprise. Lucy kept humming. She did not move. She did not open her eyes. A minute passed, then another. And then she felt something warm press against her hand. Lucy opened her eyes slowly. Little was standing right next to her, his gray snout touching her palm. His eyes were not angry anymore. They were curious, hopeful. "Hello, little one," Lucy whispered. Made a small chirping sound and pushed his head against her hand again. Lucy stroked his scales gently, still humming that low, rumbling song. Within moments had crept forward too. She circled around Lucy twice, sniffing at her clothes before settling down beside her brother. Her scales were warm against Lucy's leg, but not burning. Pyrex was the last to approach. He stood apart from his siblings, watching with suspicious eyes. Lucy did not try to call him over. She just kept humming and petting the others, showing him that there was nothing to fear. Finally, after what felt like hours, Pyrex let out a long breath and walked over to join his siblings. He lay down on Lucy's other side, close enough to touch but not quite asking to be touched. Lucy did not push. She just kept humming, surrounding the bobbies with the vibration of safety and love. For the first time since their mother died, the dragon children were at peace. Emperor had ruled for 900 years because he trusted nothing and no one. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched friends become enemies and enemies become dust. He had learned long ago that the universe was full of lies, and the only way to survive was to assume the worst and prepare for it. So when his advisors told him that the human nurse had succeeded where all others had failed, his first reaction was not joy. It was suspicion. "How long has she been with the children now?" he asked Chancellor. 3 weeks, Your Magnificence. And she has not been injured, not been frightened away. No, Your Magnificence. She has not even asked for a day off. Narrowed his eyes. What is she doing differently? Hesitated. It is difficult to explain. She has changed the nursery. She speaks to them in strange ways. She hums and sings. She does not seem to do much at all, really. But the children, they are different now. They are calm. The Emperor did not believe it. He had heard similar reports before, always followed by disaster. One nurse had claimed to have made progress just hours before Pyrex set fire to her hair. Another had sworn the children were improving right up until shattered her eardrums with a scream. He would have to see for himself. Had not visited the nursery since the early weeks of disaster. It was not that he was afraid of his own children. He was the most powerful creature in 12 star systems. He had faced armies without flinching. But there was something painful about seeing his bobbies cower from him like he was a monster. There was something heartbreaking about watching them hide and cry whenever he came near. He did not know how to fix it. He did not know how to make them love him. and that helplessness was worse than any wound he had ever suffered in battle. But now, with this report of the human nurse, he had to know the truth. He walked to the nursery alone, without guards or advisors. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as he approached the door. He could hear sounds from inside, but they were not the sounds he expected. There was no screaming, no hissing, no crashes or breaking glass. Instead, he heard something soft and rhythmic, a humming sound low and warm. And underneath that, he heard something he had never heard before, the sound of his children playing. Opened the door slowly, not wanting to startle anyone. What he saw made him freeze in place. The nursery had been completely transformed. The cold white walls were gone, replaced by rough dark stone that looked like the inside of a cave. Heat lamps glowed with orange light, casting dancing shadows everywhere. The floor was covered in sand and small rocks, and in the middle of it all, 3 baby dragons were chasing a ball made of some fireproof material. They were playing. His children, who had done nothing but scream and attack for weeks, were playing like normal healthy bobbies. And sitting cross-legged on the floor, watching them with calm attention, was the strangest creature had ever seen. The human was small and soft, with no scales or claws or fangs. Her skin was a warm brown color, her hair was dark and pulled back from her face, and her eyes were watching the children with an expression that recognized. It was the same expression that his wife had worn when she talked about the eggs, the expression of someone who loved what they were looking at. "Your Magnificence," the human said, standing and bowing her head. "I did not know you were coming." "I wanted to see for myself," said quietly. His voice was rougher than he intended. "My advisors told me things that were difficult to believe." "They're doing much better now," Lucy said. She smiled as she watched Pyrex tackle the ball and roll across the sand with it. "Pyrex still has a temper. He gets frustrated easily, and we are working on healthy ways to deal with that. Is eating regularly now and has started to show real curiosity about the world." She paused and her smile grew wider. "Is the sweetest of the 3. Once you get past his shyness, he has such a gentle heart." Looked at his children. They had stopped playing and were watching him now, but they did not run. They did not hide. They did not hiss or bare their fangs. Pyrex was standing with his head held high, his eyes curious rather than afraid, was making a soft chirping sound that remembered from his own childhood. It was a greeting, a sound of welcome. And little Shy was walking toward him. The Emperor held his breath. He had tried so many times to approach his children, and every time they had fled in terror. He did not know what to do now. He was afraid that any movement would scare them away. Reached his father and stopped. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then the little gray dragon leaned forward and bumped his head against leg in a gesture of affection. Felt something break inside him, something hard and cold that he had been carrying for weeks. His eyes burned with tears he had not shed in centuries. "How?" he asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. "How did you do this?" Lucy watched the Emperor carefully. She could see the emotion on his face, the relief and joy and pain all mixed together. She understood now why he had stayed away for so long. It was not because he did not care. It was because he cared too much and he did not know how to show it. "They just needed someone to understand them," she said gently. "Someone who was not afraid of them so they could learn there was nothing to be afraid of. Children are children, Your Magnificence, no matter what species they are. They need patience. They need consistency. And more than anything, they need to know that they are loved." "I do love them," said. "I have always loved them." "I know," Lucy said, "but they did not know. They could only feel your fear and uncertainty, and that made them afraid too." She walked over to stand beside him. Had joined now, and even Pyrex was creeping closer, his curiosity winning over his pride. "Try the humming," Lucy said. "Low and slow like this." She demonstrated, making that deep rumbling sound that the dragon bobbies loved so much. Looked at her uncertainly. Emperors did not hum. Emperors commanded armies and made speeches that shook the stars. But his children were watching him with hopeful eyes, and he would have done anything for them. He tried to copy the sound Lucy had made. It came out rough and awkward at first, nothing like the smooth song that the human produced. But his children did not seem to mind. They pressed closer to him, drawn by the familiar vibration. For the first time since they hatched, touched his children. He placed one great clawed hand on his head and stroked gently. The baby dragon closed his eyes and made a sound of pure contentment. "You have done what I could not," said to Lucy. His voice was thick with emotion. "You have given my children peace. You have given them back to me." Lucy shook her head. "I just opened the door. You are the one who walked through it." Pyrex had finally reached his father. The proud little dragon looked up at the emperor with eyes that were no longer afraid. He opened his mouth, and for a moment thought he might breathe fire. Instead, Pyrex made a sound that had never heard him make before. A soft, warm sound that needed no translation. It was the dragon word for father. The story of the human nurse spread across the galaxy like fire spreading through dry grass. It passed from world to world, from species to species, growing larger and more amazing with each telling. By the time it reached the edges of known space, Lucy Grant had become a legend. They said she had faced down 3 savage beasts with nothing but her bare hands. They said she had tamed creatures that had killed 100 nurses before her. They said she possessed some strange human magic that could calm any creature, no matter how wild or dangerous. None of that was true, of course. Lucy had not used magic. She had not been especially brave or strong. She had simply done what any good nurse would do. She had paid attention. She had listened. She had tried to understand. But the galaxy did not want a simple story. The galaxy wanted a hero. Emperor was grateful in ways that words could not express. He offered Lucy everything he could think of. He offered her a mountain of gold so large it would take a year to climb. He offered her a title that would make her nobility in the empire. He offered her a palace on any world she chose, with 1,000 servants to attend to her every need. Lucy turned down all of it. "I don't need gold," she said, "and I definitely don't need servants. I wouldn't know what to do with them." The emperor was confused. In his experience, everyone wanted something. "Then what do you want? Name anything and it is yours." Lucy thought about it for a long time. She thought about the dragon bobbies, who were now happy and healthy and loved. She thought about all the nurses who had come before her, who had fled in terror because they did not understand what they were dealing with. She thought about all the other children in the galaxy, bobbies of every species, who might be struggling simply because no one knew how to help them. "I want to teach," she finally said. "I want to show others what I learned here. There must be caregivers all over the galaxy who are dealing with difficult children. Children who scream and bite and breathe fire. Children who are called impossible or unmanageable or broken. But those children are not broken. They are just not understood." The emperor stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and his smile was warm with respect. "You are the strangest creature I have ever met," he said, "and I say that as a compliment." Within a year, Lucy had established something called the Galactic Pediatric Institute. It was a school where caregivers from any species could come to learn. The lessons were simple but powerful. Listen to the children, even when they cannot speak. Watch them carefully and try to understand what they are really trying to say. Do not be afraid, because fear only creates more fear. And always, always remember that every child, no matter how difficult they seem, is just trying to tell you something important. The institute grew quickly. Caregivers came from across 12 star systems to study Lucy's methods. They learned about vibration and sound, about environment and emotion, about patience and consistency. They learned that the key to caring for any child was not strength or technology or force. The key was understanding. And slowly, something began to change in the galaxy's view of humans. Before Lucy, most species had not thought much about the young race from the small blue planet. Humans were soft and weak. They lived such short lives that it seemed pointless to get to know them. They had no great technologies, no ancient wisdom, no special powers that made them valuable. But after Lucy, that began to change. Maybe, the other species started to think, humans had something after all. Maybe their soft hearts and stubborn minds were not weaknesses. Maybe they were strengths that the rest of the galaxy had overlooked. Other humans followed in Lucy's footsteps. They became nurses and teachers and caregivers across the empire. They worked with difficult children that no one else could handle. They showed patience in situations that would have driven other species to despair. And one by one, they built a reputation for humanity that would last for generations. As for the dragon children, they grew strong and healthy under Lucy's care. She stayed with them for 10 years, watching them change from frightened hatchlings into confident young dragons. Pyrex, the fierce one, developed into a natural leader. He still had a temper, but he had learned to control it. He would one day become a great warrior, known for protecting the weak and standing up for justice. The curious one became famous throughout the empire for her diplomatic skills. She had a gift for understanding different species, a gift she always said she learned from her human nurse. And the shy little runt grew into the most beloved member of the imperial family. He was known across 12 star systems for his gentle nature and his kind heart. When Lucy finally decided to return to Earth, the whole palace came out to say goodbye. The servants she had worked with, the advisors she had argued with, the guards who had watched her journey from the very beginning. And of course, the 3 dragons who had once been impossible bobbies. "Do you have to go?" asked. He was almost as big as Lucy now, but his eyes were still the same soft gray, and his voice was still gentle. "I've been away from home a long time," Lucy said. She reached up and stroked his snout just like she had done when he was small enough to fit in her lap. "But I'll never forget you, any of you." Pyrex stood straight and proud, trying to hide how sad he was. "You will always be welcome in our empire," he said formally. "By my honor as the future heir, I swear it." Pressed her head against Lucy's shoulder. "We would not be who we are without you. We would not be anything at all." Emperor stepped forward. He was ancient and powerful, but in this moment he looked like any parent saying goodbye to someone who had helped raise his children. "You came to us as a stranger," he said. "You leave as family. Whatever happens, wherever you go, you will always have a home here." Lucy smiled, blinking back tears. "Take care of each other," she said, "and take care of yourselves." She walked to her shuttle without looking back. If she had looked back, she might never have been able to leave. Years later, when Lucy was old and gray and surrounded by of her own, she still received letters from the Empire. They came regularly, written in careful human script by 3 dragons who had learned to write just for her. The letters told her about their adventures and their challenges, their successes and their failures. They told her that they still used the humming technique she had taught them, and that they had taught it to their own children. And in every letter, no matter how formal the occasion or how important the news, they ended with the same words. They called her by the name they had given her when they were small and frightened, and she had been the only one brave enough to stay. They called her. Lucy kept every letter in a box by her bed. On quiet nights when she could not sleep, she would take them out and read them again. She would remember the 3 little dragons who had needed her, and how she had found a way to help them when no one else could. She had not been the strongest creature in the galaxy. She had not been the fastest or the most powerful, but she had been patient. She had been stubborn. She had refused to give up when everyone else had walked away. And that, she thought, was what it meant to be human. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders. There were species that could live for thousands of years, species that could move mountains with their minds, species that could travel faster than light itself. But there was something special about humans, something that could not be measured or. Humans cared. Even when it was hard, even when it seemed impossible, humans found a way to care about creatures that were nothing like them. They looked at three screaming, fire-breathing baby dragons, and instead of seeing monsters, they saw children who needed help. That was the gift that Lucy Grant had given to the galaxy. Not a technology or a weapon or a secret formula. Just the simple idea that understanding was more powerful than fear, and that love was stronger than fire. And in the end, that was more than enough.